a very nice way to lead me, Paula. It's kind of funny.
You should have gone first.
We sort of wrote the eulogy to Dad before he ever died, so we had it all handy because we wrote these memories for his 91st birthday, like Paula said. And so I'm going to share with what I wrote in a minute. The memories I have of Dad when I was little are how secure and special he made me feel. It probably had something to do with the fact that I was the baby for a while. But I remember liking the attention of getting to sit in his lap or on his shoulders or snuggling in bed with Mom and Dad on Sunday mornings. We probably all share many of the same memories of Dad because I think he was very good at being fair and consistent. Like Paula mentioned, we had allowance books, 25 cents a week for me. We had the date, the item, in, out, balance. And we had to review it every week before we got our next allowance. For a while, I had an extra task in order to get my allowance. I don't think anyone else had this one. I had to do an extra spelling test because I wasn't a very good speller. I remember thinking that wasn't very fair. Dad took me for those early morning fishing trips. I got on the I remember eating at Sambo's in Santa Barbara before we got on the fishing boat. I don't know why I went. I didn't like sticking the hook in the bait or catching the fish particularly. I think the reason I really went was the fact that Dad asked me, and it made me feel special. I also remember clamming in Pismo. I know my dad asked me to go clamming. That was so he could have more clams. I remember how gross I thought it was when Dad would eat those clams raw with Tabasco sauce. The other thing I'm sure we all did was rub Dad's head. After all those years, I'm talking to Dad, you must have missed it when we grew up. The main chore I remember doing with Dad was Saturday yard work when we lived at Vandenberg. We had a pretty big yard, and we had a grass sweeper that we would have to use, and we would have to hand clip the grass all around the fence and sidewalk. Of course, there were all the camping trips and car drives. I remember loving it when we would drive somewhere and Dad would tell stories of his life. I thought they were so interesting. I felt lucky that my parents liked to go on trips and take us water skiing and snow skiing. None of my friends did things like that with their families. I remember thinking how great it was when you went out and bought everyone skis for Christmas. And we were going to have a new family sport. Here you were in your 50s, taking up skiing. I thought that was pretty impressive, even then. Dad was good at making us self-reliant. Whenever we asked for help with our homework, he would never just give us the answer, which is, of course, all I wanted. It seemed to be such an ordeal to get the answer. Eventually, I figured out how to do it by myself, which was probably what he wanted all along. How many parents would send Nancy and me to Europe when I was 18 and she was 21, especially in the manner that we went? No specific itinerary, just an extremely limited budget. Come to think of it, I guess that's really how our family always traveled. Talk about learning self-reliance. Dad was good at teaching me to have faith in myself. I remember one time John and I broke up. This was before we got married. Broke up when I was still in college. I came home and told Dad what had happened. I didn't know what I would do without John, and Dad told me something to the effect that I always had myself to count on. I'm sure he said it much better than that, but I always remember it gave me a lot of inner strength. Another thing I think is really special about Dad is that it always seemed like you could talk to him. In some ways, he was very tough and strict, but he always had a soft heart. Not too long, was I going to read this about driving back from Santa Barbara? Not too long ago, I had a deja vu moment with Dad. Now, this was when he was 91, not now. The last time he was in the hospital in Santa Barbara, just the two of us drove home to Lompoc. The drive from Santa Barbara to Lompoc hasn't changed much since I was a kid. And Dad talked to me the whole way home about some pretty interesting things. I felt like a kid again with my dad. It was a really special kind of feeling to me. Dad, you have always been so impressive to me, and you still are, and you always will be. I could easily go on with my memories of you. We have a very lucky family to have both the parents. Thank you, and happy birthday.